Good morning. How are each of you doing this morning? Telling Brother Jerry that it was hot in here this morning, but it just may be. And it just switched off. I don't know. Just may be me. All right, our lesson today is in, title of it is Back to Bethel. And we see here that we talk about Jacob and going back, and got a few things to tell to you about this morning. All right, the theme is God calls us where we are to take us where he wants us to be. Partial attainment is unsatisfactory. We must reach the ultimate destination of his will. Y'all ever remember the song 99 and a half won't do? Yeah. Some of our old timers used to sing it. You know, when I was in college, you know, I had some friends that come by and say, well, you know, anything above a C is wasted effort because you still passed. But with God, C's don't count. It's got to take 100. And you don't get to go back and get extra credit and all that kind of good stuff. But anyway, that's just a food for thought. Genesis 31 and 11. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, said, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest a pillar, where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise and get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. When he came from Pandanoram, and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of land, or field, where he had spread his tent, and his herd of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it Elah Israel. And God said unto Jacob, Arise, go to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. And Jacob said unto him, Jacob said unto his household, and to all that were with him, Put away they strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments. And let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make thee an altar unto God, who answers me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. And they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all of their earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. So Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan, that is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar, and called the place El Bethel, because their God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. Let's go back. I want to read you just a little bit here, back in chapter 28, and get you just a little bit more about what's going on. Pardon me this morning. It's like I told you, maybe it's just me. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up in the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. And the land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places, whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, and I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. And Jacob awakened out of his sleep, and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid, and said, How dreadful is this place, that is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate to heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning, and took the stone and that he had put for his pillar, and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil upon it on the top of it, and he called the name of the place Bethel, but the name of the city was called Luz at the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will keep my bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. Now we backed up and we read the original dream of Jacob, and you know, we realize that Jacob had deceived Isaac, his father, and he had actually stolen the birthright and the blessing from Esau, or stolen the blessing from Esau, and he fled. And as he was fleeing, he saw this dream as the angels was ascending and descending on the ladder, and it's often referred to as Jacob's ladder. And he vowed there, and he told God, he said, and he vowed and said, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, and so I will come again to my father's house in peace, and shall be the Lord be my God. And what happened was he left, and he was gone, and he was gone for 20 years, and he was searching for a wife. And he had to work 7 years, and then 7 more years, and then he stayed on 6 more years to get his blessings. And so, you look at it and you think about it in the carnal mind, and you really look at it, and we think about Jacob going back, and this whole lesson today is going back to Bethel, and going back to the place where God had sent him a dream, and God had told him he would be with him. And Jacob told him, he said, I'll come back, and I'll serve you. I'll be back in my father's house, and I'll serve you. And so, oftentimes we wonder, and we think about it, and we look at it, and we say, well, Jacob stayed gone a long time. But there was something back at the father's house he had to face, Brother Mark. Right. There was something back there that he had to face. And in the story here, we find that the angel of God, this is in chapter 31, said, spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and I said, here am I. And I wondered, sometimes when things happen, and Jacob was in the wrong, and Esau was the one being wronged. And the Bible really don't tell you, it tells you a little bit about Esau, but it really don't tell you how he felt about it. And I wonder sometimes, when I was studying this lesson, I wondered if we think about why did it take him so long to come back. But I wondered if it was those 20 years it took Esau to get him in the mindset he could forgive Jacob. Because when you talk about it and you think about it, and God sent him back, and he said, return back to Bethel. Return back to your homeland. And Jacob started, and he went, and he came to Pandorma and pitched his tent before the city. And he came back, and he came back 365 miles. He came back 95% of the way. Sometimes when things happen and when people get a blessing and start out and the Lord wants them to go somewhere, they'll go almost all the way, but they won't go the last 20 miles. There's something about it. I'll be transparent with you this morning. There's been times in my life where the Lord wanted me to do something, and you come down the altar and you pray about it, and you get up that one point, Brother Mark, and it's just like you got a brick wall, and you can't go no further. And I think that's where Jacob was at. Yeah, everybody around him thought Jacob was doing good. Everybody around him thought he left his father-in-law's place, and he'd went all these 300-something miles back home, and he was headed back, and he got over there, and he got to a place where he could buy a piece of property, and he was raising a family, and he was doing good. And on the outward appearance, it looked like he was doing what he's supposed to be doing. But on the inward side, Jacob knew there was still something that he had not gotten to. There was still a place that he had not gotten to. There's a place in the Lord that you can get to where you can have peace. There's a place that you can get to where the channel between you and God is open. If if you're not where you're at spiritually, to where you just got a true channel, to where there's no condemnation, there's nothing, when you get down to pray, there's nothing between you and God, I encourage you to find you a place and get you an experience with God and get in the altar till you have got to the place that you have a clean communication with God. Now, sometimes that happens after you get saved. People get busy, get to doing other things, and get distracted and get to going back. And I'm not saying that there was any, that with Jacob. Jacob was finding a wife, which was a good thing. He went back to the homeland. He went back to where his father had told him to go. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. And you know, when you're picking spouses and you're looking, I mean, that's an important part of life. I mean, that's a major part of life. And you need to make sure that you're in the true will of God when you're doing that. And Jacob here, he'd done that, and he'd started back. And Bethel, the first time, when he set his altar, when he anointed the stone, he called it the house of God. And that was an experience he had. And he said, and you know, and he told him, if you'll do this, I'll do that. But then God told him, he said, you arise and go back, and you go back to Bethel. And he deferred from there, and he didn't go all the way back. And so he was dwelling out there, and he was in partial obedience, and he was not fully where he needs to be. And I'm going to tell you, church, that's a bad place to be in. That's a bad place to be in. You get to the point to where and I've testified about it before because I have been there before, when you had too much but not enough. You had too much of God and too much of church and religion that you didn't fit in with the world. But you tried to hold on to too much of the other things that you really couldn't worship like you needed to in church. That's a miserable state. That's a miserable state. And you say, well, I'm not there. Sometimes we need to really check up and see exactly where we're at. You know, we look back and you know, Brother Mark does a great job of doing this, and generally it's 2 times a year he really kind of stresses it to us. He stresses it to us on December the 31st or sometime between Christmas and first couple weeks of January is, okay, this is the end of one year and this is the beginning of another year. Take a stake. Take an assessment. See where you're at. See what has happened in the last calendar year. So, you know, really examine yourself and say, well, am I where I was at, or I'm doing better, or I'm sitting still, or where am I at? And then we also do it at association, which is usually around, you know, the first Sunday in August. You kind of look again, because that's our associational year. That's when we change officers and different things. So you really need to just take a look. You know, I have built several dams that backs up water, a pond, and, you know, we do an investigation. We see what the dirt looks like. We see how high we got to build the water. And, you know, when you get finished with it, Brother Denville, if you walk down the center of that dam, we usually make them 10 foot, 12 foot wide, enough you can drive a car across it. If you walk down the center of that dam, if you walk and you take a step, and you know, your walk ain't just straight. You know, sometimes as we get older and sometimes as we change our weight distribution, sometimes our walk ain't necessarily straight. We waddle as we walk down through there. So, you know, if you walking down through there and you waddling, if you walking down the center of that dam, you have no fear of falling in the water. But if you leave the top of that dam and you get over on the edge and you're going to walk next to the water line, well, all of a sudden you're walking on an incline like this. So your feet ain't stable. You're trying to stay out of the water, but you're trying to stay close enough to the water that you can just say, I'm walking on the edge. If your spiritual life is trying to walk on the edge, you're going to stumble, you're going to get wet, you're going to get dirty, you're going to get messed up. You're subject to fall off altogether. But if you'll get up there and walk on the center of the road where God wants us to walk, You ain't got to worry about falling off backwards or falling off forwards. I mean, you may, but it's going to take a lot more to get you to fall. You may stumble, but you're still on top of the dam. You can get up and go on. But if you stumble on the side, you're walking so close to the edge that any little stumble, you're going to be gone. And so Jacob here, he was trying to get back to where he's supposed to be, and he got almost there, but he was so close until he was just sitting on the edge. And you know, there was a few things that happened to Jacob. There was 4 things that he had to do to really get back to where he needed to be at Bethel. One of those is he had to be a confession of God. He had to realize, yes, God, I'm Jacob. I'm the one that deceived him. I'm the one that deceived and stole my brother's blessing. I'm the one that deceived my dad. And I got to live with that the rest of my life. I'm the one. And he wrestled with that angel. When the angel came to him, he wrestled with him all night. And he finally said, what is your name? And you think, well, probably the angel already knew what his name was. But the last time he was trying to get a blessing, he was trying to disguise himself as Esau. He was trying to disguise himself as something he really wasn't. Sometimes when you really get back to where headed back to where you need to be and headed back to your Bethel experience, we just got to realize and step up and say, God, it's Randy. It's not so-and-so, it's not so-and-so, it's not so-and-so. It's me, God. It's me that needs the blessing. It's me that needs to go back. Yes, it's me you're talking to. It's me that you're trying to identify with. I ain't going to try to sugarcoat it. I ain't going to try to get out of it. It's me, Lord, and I got to go. If we look down and we look at this and we look at what happened and where he was at and what he was doing and when he was wrestling with the devil, do you realize what happened to him? And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince thou hast power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob said unto him, I pray thee my name. And he said, wherefore it is that thou asked after my name, and he will be blessed him there. And what happened is he changed his name. Because Jacob meant deceiver, but Israel meant the prince of God. And so anyway, so he not only had to confess that, yes, I am Jacob. I'm the one that deceived. Yes, it's me. It's not Esau. It's not somebody else. It's me. And once he did that, he blessed him. But there was something that happened to him when he blessed him. He touched the hollow of his thigh. So the next morning when he got up to go, he limped. You know, sometimes in life when God's trying to get your attention and get my attention, sometimes you go through some things that when you get over with it, you still got a scar from it. You still got something that you remember an experience from. Jacob wasn't ready to go back to face Esau until after he'd wrestled with the devil. After he'd wrestled with the angel. He was probably wrestling with the devil a little bit too, but he was wrestling with the angel that night. But he wasn't ready to go back until after this. And then sometimes we as children of God, sometimes when he's wanting us to go and do things, sometimes he has to do stuff to us to get our attention before we'll really commit and say, yes, Lord, it's me. And sometimes those things that happens to you will leave scars. Sometimes those scars will stay with you for the rest of your life. But what he was doing, he was trying to get his attention. The second thing he had to do is he had to apologize to Esau. Now we read here where in these verses, and he says in chapter 33, it says, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked and beheld Esau came, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children of Leah and unto Rachel, and said unto the 2 handmaids, and he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. It's a powerful place to be. You know, sometimes when the God wants us to seek restitution and wants us to go face what we got to face, sometimes it's not easy. And what did Jacob do? He sent all those animals over as a peace offering. Esau didn't want all that. God had blessed him. He had stuff. What he wanted was his brother. And it wasn't Esau that came to Jacob. It wasn't the one that had been wrong, but it was the one that had done the wrong that had to go back to Esau. And you look back, and this is where I told you earlier that it just pondered in my mind. It ain't written anywhere. But I wondered why, we look at it and we wonder, well, he worked 7 years for one wife and 7 years for another wife and then 6 more years for the blessings. And you wonder, why did it take him so long? And you think back, in my mind, I went back and thinking, okay, well, maybe it took 20 years for Esau to really forgive him, to really get him to the place that he could forgive him. Because, let's face it, if he'd went back the first week, it might not have been the same kind of meeting. But you realize that even though Jacob did come back, even though Jacob did apologize, even though Jacob did do the things he should have done, even though Esau did forgive him, there was 20 years of their life that they lost because of him being deceived. We live in a society to where it's almost prevalent. When the mom and dad dies and they have anything to leave to the children, if they didn't spell it out, I for I and T for T, and explain it in every little bit, them kids are going to fuss over it. It almost to the point that you want to be as if you're a person that has anything of any value, is spend it all and say, y'all fend for yourself, because I don't want you fighting over my stuff. It's happened. Y'all know it, and then you see them where they deceive, where one child will go in and talk to mom and dad and try to change the will and try to change this and try to change that before they die without the other one's knowledge. It happens all the time. This deceitful heart, this deceitful blessings happens in today's society. And it happens, I hate to say it, but it happens among church people. Because the root of evil is the love of money. And so at times we just, I'm getting off the subject, but I'm just telling you, be careful. When you really, I want you to take something home to you. I want you to take something home this morning. At times, Brother Mark mentioned something the other day that in an ordination service, and he was talking about that the preachers today preach different than they did years ago because, and he really explained it. He says we're facing things different. People are differently educated than they were years ago, and you have to explain things different to them, and you're facing a lot more stuff that's readily available to you that wasn't even thought about years ago. But yes, that is true, and he explained that very well. But I want to tell you something that I remember a sermon from years ago. Brother Roy Gaskins preached it. I was a little kid. But he preached hellfire and brimstone so hard until I could picture a lake of fire. And I could picture hands and arms and people reaching up and people crying and gnashing of teeth and me falling into that. He preached it so strong and built the picture to me so strong until that wasn't where I wanted to go. And when you lose sight of what hell really is and what the lake of fire really is, and the devil gets you to where you really lose sight of what we're trying to avoid. Yes, heaven's wonderful. Heaven's really wonderful. Being with Jesus is wonderful. But being in the lake of fire and being deceived and being down for the rest of your life and for eternity, that's terrible. And when you really look at it, there is nothing on the face of this earth that is worth going to hell over. There's not a friendship, there's not a crossword, there's not anything that you might have done or anything that you might have thought you done or whatever somebody might have done to you, as bad as it might have ever been. There's nothing worth going to hell over. You know, we live in a society where people keep grudges. They build them up in their heart. I mean, it happens to me all the time. I mean, you know, something that I thought might have happened 4 or 5 years ago, might have said something, and somebody got their feelings hurt, and they still bring it up today, Brother Martin. I mean, little bitty frivolous things. I mean, just the little slightest things. You know, you just might have left this one out and spoke to this one and didn't speak to that one. And then just a little grudge starts holding there. Folks, we can't lose. We can't lose over little things or big things either. But don't let them little foxes rule the vine. Don't let these little things and little isms and schisms and things that goes on and just eats at you. Don't let it lose your victory, because one thing we're headed for is we're shut in hell. And if we lose our sight of what we're really trying to avoid, you'll start saying, well, this thing just kind of builds and mounds and gets bigger. And I realize, just like Esau and Jacob, it wasn't just easy for Jacob to go back and face Esau. That was a hard task. He waited 20 years before he went back. And then when he started back, he got as far as he could go, and he got close enough, he could probably hear and knew what was going on over there. Probably some of his people went over there, and probably different things happened. But God said, that ain't far enough. That ain't far enough. You got to go face him. You got to go back to Bethel. You got to go back to that experience. And church, we got to get to the point. God's grace is sufficient. I'm not going to tell you that those little things are not hard to do. And Jacob really realized he wrestled with the angel all night long. And it was coming to the breaking of the day. And he said, will you bless me? Will you help me? Will you go with me? Will you assure me that it's going to be okay when I get there? And he did. And when he started down the road, what did he see? He saw Esau coming to him. Because I believe when you get to the point that you say, Lord, I'm going to do what I got to do, that he's already worked on the other side. And he knows what's going to happen when you get there. The next thing he had to do was he had to destroy the idols. He had to get rid of those things that was hindering him, those things that was zapping his victory, those things that was taking that he had brought from the other land and was bringing back, and they had to destroy them. And they took them off and they left them, and he had to go back and to take those with him. Over in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14, it said, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship have righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion have light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? And what part hath he that believeth with the infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, for they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And I will be the Father unto you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. When you head back to Bethel, and you head back to where you need to be, and you head back to that experience, you got to leave those things beside you. You got to leave those idols and those things that you worship and those things that you have put before God. And you know, when we talk about idols and you read about idols in Scripture, everybody thinks about those little things that you just set up on the counters and you worship. But that's not exactly what all idols are. Idols is anything that you put before God. when it takes your time away from the time that you should be spending with God, that becomes an idol to you. That becomes something that you want to look after and achieve and work and do more so than being a part of God. Now, I realize we have to provide for our family, and we have to work, and there has to be a balance. But you still got to make time for God. And what he did is his family, he told them, he says, y'all gather all it up to me. And he says, you gather it to me, and we're going to hide it here under the oak tree. And we're going to leave it right here, and we're headed back. So that's the first thing that one of the things that you got to do is you got to make up in your mind that I'm going to leave the things that I'm doing, the things that's hindering me from my blessing, the thing that's hindering me. When you look back on your life and you can look back 6 months, you can look back a year, you can look back 5 years, look back to when you got saved or when you got filled with the Holy Ghost. Whatever stakes that you put down in life of experiences that you've had with God, and you say, where am I at today versus where was I at then? And you say, have I increased or have I decreased? Am I going to Bethel continually? Am I still having a worship with God, or do I need to get back to where I was at? And I'm not painting you a bad picture this morning. I'm just trying to jog in your memory, and you think, and you analyze me analyze Randy, and you analyze you as to where's your experience this morning. Are you like Jacob, or are you on fire for God? And what I would like to tell you is, if you're not where you want to be, you can go back to Bethel, and you can go back and get an experience. The other thing that you find out here is that after he went back and after he started, the fourth thing he did is he renewed his vows. He did his first works over. He went back, and if you'll notice in reading of the scripture over in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, it says, keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. For they consider not that they do evil. But not rash with thy mouth. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thy heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and the fool's voice is known by multitude of words. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou vowest. Better it is he that shouldeth not vow than thou shouldest vow and not pay. What he's saying there is, what he was telling Jacob here is, you vowed that you was going to come back and worship me. You vowed if I did this or this, that you were going to serve me, and that you was going to worship me, and you was going to come back to your father's house. And you haven't done that. I like to encourage young Christians, be careful what you say. Be careful the vows that you make unto God. Because sometimes I have a friend of mine and he tells the story. He's probably in his 70s, and he was a teenager at the time, and he was praying for a blessing. And in the altar and praying, he said, Lord, I'll read a chapter every night. And when he was up in his 30s and 40s, he made a statement. He says, I'm trying to keep my vow. He said, some nights I look for the smallest chapter in the Bible. Some nights I don't look for those that's 150, 160 verses. But what I'd like to encourage you is be careful your vows, because some of them's harder to keep than others. But if God tells you to do something, or instructs you or leads you to do something, then you make sure you keep that. But for all matter, keep his word. Live by his word. Live daily. And, as Jacob, when he went back and he did his first works and he went back to Bethel, there's something that happened. And this is something I want to read to you. It says, upon arrival, he builds an altar. He says the stone put him there into contact with the house of God, but the altar put him in contact with the God of the house. Sometimes, his first experience was really he found the house of God. But the last experience he had, he found the God of the house. And there's a difference. There's a difference in coming to church and finding the house of God, and coming to church and finding the God of the house. You can come to church every Sunday, every time the door's open, and sit on the pew and feel the Spirit and feel it and see the evidence of it moving. See it on different people and see how it blesses the church. But there's a difference of when you come and you feel it for yourself, and when you come and it's your experience and he comes and dwells in you. It's a difference when you carry him back home and you go back home and he's with you in the closet. He's with you in the car. He's with you in the yard. He's with you when you meet the folks at Walmart or wherever else you may go. It's different when you have God of the house instead of just the house of God. And so what did Jacob do? The first time he set a stone and he poured oil on it. The second time he built an altar. To me, that means the first time he marked the place. The second time he says, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay here. Church, we can stay at Bethel. We can stay in God's presence. We can stay in God's true will. And we can stay where he wants us to be. A little illustration here I want to read you. And well, I lost it. Here it is. It says, and I might not have pronounced his name right because it says Mendelssohn, the great German composer and organist, once visited the cathedral of Freiburg, and having heard the great organ, went into the organ loft and asked to be allowed to play it. The old organist is jealous in his instrument and first refused, but then asked, can you play well? And he said, he replied back to, if you let me play, you can be the judge of my talent, replied Mendelssohn. Sitting at the organ, the master of music began pressing the instruments. Keys and melodious thunder filled the cathedral. Hearing it, the church organist was for a few moments caught up in the ecstasy of the performance. Then suddenly he grasped the man and explained, who are you? What is your name? Mendelssohn replied, the player. Next to church music, the Lord said, oh, please forgive me. Forgive me to think that I almost refused the great Mendelssohn touch on my organ. Never before has such sounds came from my organ. Sometimes we're ignorant with Christ, and all he wants to do is touch our life. If we really let him touch our life and really let him take control of our life and lead us, there's no telling what we can become. Whereas sometimes we want to be in control of our own ways and don't really want to turn loose and let God have his way. So this morning I'd like to tell you, let's make sure we have the experience with the God of the house and that we're doing and worshiping like he'd have us to worship. And if there's something going on in your life and your experience with Bethel is not where it should have been, or if you are just this morning would like to have a closer walk, a greater touch, we're not just hanging on the fact that we have dealt with a pandemic for the last 16 months or so. But I'm going to tell you, the fears and the reality and what has happened to the church and where church is at today has affected our spiritual lives. There's no need in denying it. I mean, we're still attending, and there's a good group this morning in the Sunday school. We're still coming and worshiping. But have we really cut loose and really said, yes, Lord, it's me, Lord. Yes, Lord, I want to get my blessing. I want to overcome this or that. And I'm going to say, Lord, it's me. My mind is cluttered. My mind is this or my mind is that. I wrestled with this or I wrestled with that. Or I'm dealing with this or I'm dealing with that. But, Lord, I want to get back to Bethel. I want to get back to an experience that I can be at the altar and be fruitful and be back into our vow that we would serve and be in God's will and seek God and be in God's perfect will. Because, church, we ain't made it yet. And when you get there, when they say the last final breath or thing over you and you take your last breath, it's finished. There's no extra credit. There's no going back to fix anything. There's no going back and saying, I'm sorry, or going back and fixing anything. And on the flip side, if you're still living in this world and you're looking at somebody and you say, well, they died, I wished I had talked to them. I wished I'd done this, or I wished I'd done that. There's no going back. There's no going back to talk to them when they left. So if this morning, if there's something in your life if there's something that's bothering you, if you're a Jacob and an Esau, if it's a family member, if it's a friend or whatever, life's too short, heaven's too sweet, and hell's too hot for us to let anything keep us from making it to heaven and shunning hell. So I'd encourage you this morning, whatever it takes, let's really make up our mind. Lord, I don't want to have any questions, any concerns, any place in my life where I'm thinking, well, is that right or is that wrong? But let me have a clean conscience, a pure conscience towards you, one that I can worship and one that I can feel free. So thankful for your time this morning. Thank you for listening. May God bless you.